Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, my name is Mika Levo, as was already mentioned, and I work with a company called Pollen VC.
A little bit.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's great.
Just give you a bit more face.
Yes.
Sorry, look at that.
Yeah.
This is how the magic happens.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
All about production value.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how many of you know Pollen VC, but Pollen is fintech company who enables app and game companies to grow faster by giving the access to their earned revenue in weekly basis instead of waiting 35 to 40 days, that money coming on from the platforms. We also do user acquisition support, and part of that user acquisition support is LTV modeling. Hence, today we are a little bit talking on the LTV. LTV is a measure of expected total earnings, what you would get from a user on its lifetime within your app or a game. So it kind of gives you a kind of monetization potential of your game, and it's a key metric to use or to understand if you want to kind of do any paid acquisition in scale. Because you need to really have the customer lifetime value to access your user acquisition cost, your CPI, CPA, and when you have that model done right, then you are ROI positive and you can really scale up your business. But anyway, before we go on the panel, I would really like to also hear a little bit your background. So how many of you are working indirectly on user acquisition within your work? Just kind of hands up. Okay. Good. Do we have any product managers also? Yes. Anyone directly developing the app? Developers? Okay. So mainly you are from the UA, which is good. So then we can shift our answers accordingly. Okay, but let's go and sit down. Okay, I'm not sitting down, but you already are. Yeah. So welcome, and if you could just quickly state what is already shown over there on the board, but who you are, where you come from, and company and that.
Hi, Antti Paikkala is my name. I work with Small Giant Games. Our most recent game is called Empires and Puzzles. It's a great match 3 puzzle RPG game, available for free on the App Store, etc. I work as a user acquisition manager, so solely using LTV for various functions, including how I can actually buy users and know when they're making money for me, i.e. what's the price that I can pay for users. So that's why LTV is more.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Fodor. I'm a founder of AppAgent. We help mobile companies, both startups in apps and games, to grow their user base and revenues through 5 areas: mobile marketing strategy, data analytics, creative services, user acquisition, and growth management. Today we work, for example, for Vuga or CI Games.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matías Brizuela. I'm product manager from Two Dreams. Basically, I'm in charge of the portfolio of the games. We are the creators of the Drive Ahead family of games. I joined the team 3 months ago, and I'm really happy to be here talking about something that difficult as LTV.
Yeah, hi, my name is Regina. I'm the product manager for Armada's first game, Quantum Siege. We soft launched end of May this year and heading for hard launch. Interesting times, I can say. Yeah, I joined Armada 1 year ago, roughly. And yeah, happy to answer all your questions on LTV and what it has to do with product management.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's start this a little bit talking about overall metrics, routine, and analytics on daily basis. Okay, for example, Regina, you have now, as you said, okay, you have a game in a soft launch. How do you kind of work on weekly, on daily level with the game metrics, and how do you do it?
Yeah, so on a daily basis, we look at the usual suspects. It gives us insights on new users from our main interesting channels, also our activity and progression metrics checking on a daily basis. What now in soft launch is extremely interesting for us is the retention rates, especially the early retention rates. Also sanity check on a daily basis on them, and of course revenue. But on a weekly basis, we work together closely with our UA experts to see what we can improve on our campaigns, also how we can improve our marketing creatives. And on a weekly basis, we also check currency balancing on hard and soft currency with the design team. So that's the main regular metrics views, and of course LTV, but that's more on an ad hoc basis, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. Peter, I mean, you're coming from the agency point of view, so how do you work with the kind of this analytics and the metrics within the agency?
You know, this is basically the same what Regina mentioned. We divide KPIs into two areas. First one is so-called top of the funnel, which means everything what happens before the user opens the app. So CTR of ads, conversion rate in the store, of course, cost per install, cost per some action, and then KPIs related to the product itself. So retention, onboarding, how people progress through the first couple of screens, up to some very specific metrics which are like specific for that game or game genre. What we try to do is to look at trends. We quite often look at daily cohorts, especially when there is some change in the campaign setup or in the game itself, some new mechanic or change of the product itself. Then we can understand if that particular change is improving the performance or not. So this would be my advice, to look how it evolves day by day and to make some conclusions from it.
Okay. Then, okay, on those metrics, Antti, as you have already had the game out from the spring, so how do you what would be your advice for the developer when they can really kind of hit on the gas and start to scale? So what are you looking in the metrics side, and how do you interpret then that you know that, hey, now this is okay and we can push the pedal?
Right. I think the most important thing is consistency, and seeing that you have that you have the best possible idea of what your product actually is and where it's actually performing. So let's say you have day 1, day 7 retentions, for example, that are very sustainable, and there's no major spikes in no matter sort of where your user intake might differ and will differ day to day, but at least so that players actually stay there. And then, of course, monetization is another thing that you might want to keep an eye on, whatever that metric then is that you've decided to go for. But basically, when you get to a point where you can have a certain amount of consistency and you rely on your modeling, be it from Pollen or be it internally built, when you have a very consistent track record, then you'll know that, okay, now is the time that I want to start testing whether or not this will actually sustain. So I think whatever your main indicators are, that they're consistent, is the most important thing.
Okay, yeah. Matthias, Do Dreams is more on the arcade side. So how do you see the things differently in your genre than in the more strategic games, or how do you kind of know?
Yes, basically the main challenge of the kind of games we create, it's try to identify the proper segment where we are getting the best results, and based on the behavior of that segment, start building the strategy in terms of features. But basically, we try to keep an eye on which is the segment that is actually bringing the most interesting amount of revenue, and around that, start building new features or making changes to the gameplay or to the type of offers and all that. Always aiming to improve the lifetime value.
Okay, yeah. Okay, let's also talk a little bit about user acquisition. In the UA, it's all the time changing, as you well were. So how is your kind of user acquisition strategy? Currently, it's more kind of the CPI that, that people looking in cost per install is a little bit kind of, going away. It's more on cost per action, cost per event. do you see this one kind of happening in your work as well, Peter?
Yes, of course. This is a thing which works very well for our clients. Of course, it's much more expensive when you go for CPA. It could be like 3 times more the CPI for the same title and rather the same target group. But also we see the growth of the profit about like 30%, for example. So it's definitely something you should explore, probably not in the early stage of the product and marketing testing in the soft launch, but once you go out for a global launch, this can help you to attract really high quality users. And the magic is in how you define this cost per action, what it should be, and we'll probably discuss it later on.
Yeah. So those events are important. So any kind of practical tips on what events to build over there, and also what tools do you use? So basically, what is your analytics stack, what you use? Anything on that, Regina?
Yeah, now for Amada, we haven't digged into that deeper at the moment, but from our previous companies, we always used the purchase as the event that was really crucial, but also the price extremely high. So for casino games, for example, I was working on it was around $90 for the CPA. For Armada, I would say we should look more into, we have a PvP mode, and we know that people who play, for example, 5 PvP battles on the first day, they have an extremely high late retention. So on day 30, it's around 17% already. So we were looking into that, and I hope in the future we can define and go for the CPA on that metrics more. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, let's also talk about a little bit on LTV as it's the title over here. So, how do you see the LTV overall, the methodology on kind of measuring the LTV, how it's calculated, and so do you do it for the do you model it out for the 90 days, 180 days, or how do you do it, Antti?
Well, for us, for gaming, there's a few different routes you can go. You can either try to model it based on your monetization. The monetization is sort of scaling up according to however long the game goes on, or you can do it based on the retention curve of the users and fit your monetization to that. We have a pretty simple approach in terms of we're selecting various different cohorts depending on be they daily or country-based or OS-based, and then we measure the entirety of revenue that's come in for a certain cohort divided by the amount of installs, get basically revenue per install, and then just fit that to the monetization curve, and that then just backs out into a certain LTV at some point in time. And that's combining, and then on top of that, we then put ad revenue in addition to our in-app revenue, which is the majority, of course, for us being a strategy game. But the ad LTV itself, I think, deserves another panel or something, because it's way beyond my control, at least, to understand where that's coming from. And that's a big challenge that few companies have been able to really solve, but those that do it have been very successful with it.
Peter?
Okay, so you haven't mentioned the K factor, which is, the simple LTV model is lifetime multiplied by average revenue per daily active user, but it becomes more interesting when you start discussing what's the virality, what's the K factor, how you count it. And because we work with many teams, I've seen very different approaches to this. One group of companies don't consider virality at all in their LTV modeling. I'm not sure if it's your case because you haven't mentioned it. Then there are some companies which consider everything else than paid install as a virality. So they put everything in one basket. The third approach, which I personally prefer, is that I try to measure the organic boost on the top of my paid acquisition effort. So if I buy one user, then attribute, let's say, 20% more, which is correlated to the install. So only virality coming from paid efforts. And the most sophisticated companies, such as Miniclip, for example, they are able to analyze the data so well that they can say this is a K factor for featuring by Apple or Google. This is coming from in-game invites, etc. But this requires lots of data and very good data analysis team to be able to go to this granular level. To me, it's enough to count what comes from the paid install by platform, country, and also channel, because this might differ, and that's kind of like conservative approach for smaller teams. It works very well.
Yeah.
Well, we are a little behind in terms of LTV calculation because of the nature of our games. And also because the main challenge is our games mainly monetize through ads. The calculation of ARPU sometimes is not quite accurate to make a projection. So now we are working on gathering all the information possible from ad networks and from the game to have a clear understanding of which is the ARPU as a main element in the calculation of the LTV. And also one variable that it's important for us to have a clear projection, a clear understanding of which is the LTV, is the churn rate. It's one element that it's really important to have at least an idea of which will be that projection of LTV.
Yeah. Okay, how do you actually do the LTV measurement? I mean, any kind of tips or tools what you use, what you basically, advise people to use? Any? Not stating the obvious in the room, but
yeah, I mean, especially in soft launch, we take all the data we're gonna get at the moment. We started quite simply with just a simple retention curve, so that's using the weighted sums of, for example, day 1, day 7, day 14, day 30 retention, and we used that at the beginning. So last week I started to use also the famous Eric spreadsheet.
Okay, yes.
So it's really easy to use. You just need your first day 30 retentions, or from day 1 to 30 retention, and then copy paste it in the spreadsheet. So you get a nice integral of the retention function. And I would recommend using this. It's really easy to use, even for me. So.
Yeah, I think that spreadsheet is where everything is started. Matthias, what tools do you use?
We are in the process right now of trying to use the current tools. Basically, we use a lot of game analytics, but basically, in this moment, we are working with a new data scientist that joined our team, and we are making a lot of changes into the games to gather that information and to have our own source of data to have a clear measurement.
For the beginning, I believe that Excel is a good starting point, and then if you have someone a little bit more capable of doing some API connections, then what Regina mentioned with Google Spreadsheets, that's the second level, because you can import data automatically, for example, from AppsFlyer or Adjust. So this can be calculated automatically, and you can see some LTV curves without manual work. And then, of course, it's a natural way to progress to integrate this into your BI tools and have it in a more complex setup. But for the beginning, what was mentioned before, I think it's a good start, and it's the easiest way how to figure out what works best for you without the smaller costs.
Yeah, so for Small Giant, we've been there where you just have the Excel and you just try to run everything as smoothly as possible based on that. But then after making a few games that with only that as the background, came to the realization that we also have to build something like really capable. So the guys were able to build basically their own analytics engine within a year. And after that, it's just made my life as a marketer so much easier because I can pretty reliably get all the data that I need. So if you have the time and resources, please build your own thing because it's totally going to back out for you.
Okay, excellent. Really good, thanks. No, I think we have also some time left, so we would kind of do any questions from the audience. If you had any. Shall I? Okay.
Chris is faster.
Hi, it's Frederick Lukender here. So my question is actually related to LTV and also the other side of the coin, so CPI or CPA, as you were talking about. So if the event when you're doing cost per action kind of campaigns, if the event is that the person needs to spend, then essentially what you're talking about is cost per paying user, not CPA, right? So the cost per paying user, the flip side of the coin, is no longer LTV as we would normally call it, but it's the LTV of spenders because they have different retention profiles, right? So how have you guys gone about that? Do you have spender retention profiles separately and then create the LTVs for spenders only? Or do you still use the kind of generic retention rates when calculating LTVs?
Anyone? Someone?
Yeah, you put us in a bit of a tricky question, but thanks for that. So CPA is definitely a world of its own, and a lot more ad networks are now bringing aboard CPA-based models. And those are sort of trickier for advertisers also to figure out what to do with. So the valuation dilemma is exactly like what you've said, that the more specific you go, the further away you get from sort of broad enough cohort type thinking that it actually ends up being worth your time, because you can spend a lot of time trying to model very specific people's behavior, and then you're missing out on the forest basically of what you're really trying to do with UA, which is to increase your audience size. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do CPA-based things, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do very deep funnel things. You just need to consider that how well is your time spent actually figuring out these things.
Maybe we'll add one more thing, which is about the definition of the cost per action, what the action should be. Purchasers are one of the goals you can use for Facebook or AdWords. But it might happen that your game monetizes later, not the first day, maybe in a week, maybe in a month. In that case, it's necessary to figure out some event which happens on the day one, and it happens in let's say volume that 10 to 25% of users perform that event on the first day. And then you can optimize or let Facebook and AdWords optimize campaigns fairly quickly without waiting for the purchase in a long term. And then we become somewhere in the middle of the cost per install and the cost per payer, which you have mentioned, because you are paying for some prediction, which in some time will generate the payment.
You have other questions? Oh, over here. He's putting his hand up. It's very, very small height there, but I'm going to still find you.
Yeah. Thank you. Could you give some examples for kind of campaign manager rules of thumb for when you're buying users at scale? How many days you kind of give a cohort before you estimate it, and what kind of rules of thumb do you use? Is it just a single analytics event? Is it a combination of events, or is it the ROI, or is it something different?
I didn't get
Go ahead.
Very quickly, a great question. Thanks for that. We always look at several KPIs because it might happen that you are acquiring a group of users which, for example, will pay later on. And if you look only at payments, you will exclude them. So if there is a good retention, for example, or good some custom post-install event, let's say level 3 reached, etc., then we keep it running for a couple of more days to make the final decision. But we always look at more things, and I think that where the expert value comes, that you are able to think deeper than some algorithm and give it some time, or stop it even sooner than some algorithm will do it.
So I'm going to assume that, of course, there's several types of campaigns. Either there's something that you want to have results right away and then just do a burst or something like that and get results immediately and then scram. What I like to think about campaigns is always like sustained, always-on type UA campaigns. And for that, at least what I've seen as a sort of rule of thumb is to give a campaign at least 7, preferably 14 days at a certain scale, to give you the sort of idea that the consistency of said campaign is like good enough, that you're buying, let's say, from network X and they're seeing, okay, my day 1 retention seems to consistently be this, and my day 3 retention also seems to be consistently this, and then you can back out revenue based on that, and then the more sort of day 7 also gives you enough time to give your model enough time, no matter what it's based on, that you can also have a more defined idea of what this sort of user source is actually giving you. And then after around 7 days, or a mature 7 days, you can then figure out, should you bid higher, should you bid lower, should you just pause completely, or what should be done.
Okay. There was one question over here. Yep.
Hold on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Emmanuel at App Chocolate. I have a question from all panelists. We talk about LTV, so I would like to kind of compare performance. So of course, without disclosing, kind of internal figures, but maybe comparing with a base of 100 for like an average organic users on the US market, how your LTV compare in various geos across Europe compared to US, and across different channels of acquisition compared to organic, like user acquisition on Facebook, AdWords, video ads, etc., compared to index of 100, like over, below, what kind of performance for channels and for geography?
Anyone?
I can answer first. So, for me, that's a fairly sort of broad question. But for me, at the end of the day, as a marketer, I approach it that I don't really sort of consider the LTV as my main goal. The strategy that we have at Small Giant is the return on ad spend is the main goal. And the LTV is kind of the vessel with which I know how much money I can actually spend. And then at various points in time, be it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, etc., I need to be able to hit that goal. So whether or not the source has a high LTV, that's great. That means that I can bid higher, get more of the same. So in that sense, it's more for me a ways to an end, and the end being to grow the game as much as possible and still make money on it.
I have to agree. We basically look only at profit. In Indonesia, the CPI could be 50 cents and the LTV 75, and it's good. And in the US, it could be $5 for install and LTV $8, and still it works for us well. So we don't look at the LTV as a number, but at the profit. And then the question is, how much profit do you need? How do you calculate your company costs if you include your wages, etc. So some companies really look for recouping their advertising spend only, and some want to get back 150% of their investment. That's a completely different discussion.
Yeah.